Just about the time of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, a boy named Bennet was born in the mountain village of Nursia, northeast of Rome. He was a very serious child who thought a lot about right and wrong. He was described as having the mind of an old man in a young man's body. Bennet's parents sent him to Rome to study, but the lying, cheating, and dishonesty he saw in the city upset him. He left Rome and decided to live as a monk, devoting himself to a religious life. At that time, there were many monks in Asia, but there were very few of them in Europe. The European monks who did exist lived isolated from the world, alone and away from all other people. They denied themselves the comforts of life for religious reasons. Many of them did things that were harsh and painful to themselves. They went without food or lived in a cave for years on end. That is what Bennet did at first. He spent 3 years living in a cave by himself. Eventually, Bennet, now called Benedict, decided that it was not enough to pray alone in a cave. He believed that monks should serve God and people. Gradually, Benedict became known as a holy man. A group of rich and influential monks invited him to become the leader of a monastery. Benedict accepted, but things did not go very well. When Benedict tried to get the other monks to serve God by helping other people, they refused. The situation became so hostile that some of the monks even tried to poison Benedict. Benedict saw that to put his new ideas into practice, he would have to start his own monastery. He moved to the town of Monte Cassino and wrote a book that is known today as The Rule of Saint Benedict. This book contains a list of rules to be followed in the monastery. Benedict did not ask people to seek holiness by going without food and water. Instead, Benedict asked monks to find God in ordinary, simple, and useful work. Work was balanced with prayer and reading, sleeping and eating. He also emphasized the importance of working together and getting along with everyone else in the monastery. Monte Cassino was a successful monastery, and Benedict's fame spread. Soon other monasteries were created to follow his rules. Monasteries following Saint Benedict's rules were called Benedictine monasteries. These monasteries tried to be self-sufficient. That means that the monks grew and made almost everything they needed for themselves. They had gardens in which they raised their own vegetables. They kept chickens and goats to provide eggs and milk. They made cheese. They also baked their own bread, sewed their own clothing, brewed beer, and made wine. Does this seem strange that these deeply religious people drank beer and wine? This is a good example of how customs change over time. In the Middle Ages, almost everyone drank small amounts of beer every day. Beer was considered a healthy drink because of the grains used to make it. There was usually just one meal a day with a cold snack in the evening. Meals consisted of bread with eggs, cheese, or fish. The monks ate at assigned places. There was no conversation during the meals, but one monk read aloud from the scriptures or other religious books. Benedict also asked monks to follow a shared schedule. When the bell rang for prayer, everyone in the monastery stopped whatever he was doing and went to the church. A day in the monastery was divided into 3 general work periods. Monks spent about 6 hours in prayer and 6 hours doing manual work, such as gardening, cooking, or sewing. About 4 hours were spent studying and writing. Monks slept 7 to 8 hours a night. St. Benedict's rules are interesting to read in today's busy times. The abbot made the rules in the monastery, and all monks had to obey him. Monks were required to show hospitality to all guests, whether invited or not. They had to treat all the monastery's possessions, whether gardening tools or precious altar pieces, with great care. The rule of Saint Benedict had a great influence not only on Benedictine monasteries, but also on other types of monasteries that developed later. This influence extended to convents and therefore to nuns, too. Altogether, these religious institutions had a great impact on Europe's history. Monasteries took on the role of supplying missionaries to spread Christianity. Saint Benedict himself was a missionary. Perhaps one of the most famous missionaries was Saint Patrick, who brought the Christian religion to Ireland. Saint Augustine of Canterbury, another famous missionary, brought Christianity to the Anglo-Saxons of Britain. Saint Boniface converted many groups of people in what is now Germany. During this time, governments provided little or no help for poor people. Saint Benedict believed that each monastery should offer help to the poor and needy. Thanks to him, over time, more help came from the church. Monks and nuns ran hospitals for the poor and schools for the children to train to become monks and nuns. Priests, monks, and nuns demonstrated that caring for the poor was part of their Christian duty. One of the most important things that monasteries and convents did was to set up libraries. In the early Middle Ages, books were rare and expensive. Some people went their whole lives without ever seeing a book. Every book that had been written was copied by hand. Although there were important Islamic libraries in Asia and Africa, in Europe almost all the libraries that existed were in monasteries. Monks worked long hours, often by candlelight, copying ancient texts. Monks didn't just copy the words either. They also decorated the first letters of important words and the borders of their manuscripts, and they produced beautiful illustrations. Today, these handwritten books from the Middle Ages are considered valuable works of art. Nearly all the manuscripts from the early Middle Ages were written in Latin. Even after the fall of the Roman Empire, Latin remained the official written language in Europe. Any document that had religious, legal, or scholarly significance was written in Latin. For the most part, the only people who knew how to read and write during this time were priests, monks, and nuns. This was largely because the only schools that existed were religious schools, and most of the students there were in training for a religious career. People learned about the Bible from listening to a priest, monk, or nun. Instead of books, information was passed along in different ways. Most people learned by watching and doing. Children would watch their parents make things, take care of animals, and farm. They grew up learning to do these things. Eventually, they would get married and pass on these skills to their own children. For more skilled crafts such as shoemaking and barrel making, young men would work alongside master artisans to learn their craft. Reading was an important activity in many monasteries and convents, but few people sat and read silently to themselves. Most of the time, one person would read aloud to a group. If people wanted to make an oath, it was considered more important to say it out loud than to write it down and sign it. Monasteries and convents still exist in the modern world, and monks and nuns continue the work they have done for more than 1,000 years. Today, however, there are thousands of schools, universities, hospitals, and libraries all over the world. It may be hard to imagine how important the work of Benedictine monasteries was to the lives of Europeans. But for hundreds of years, monks and nuns were the teachers, writers, librarians, book publishers, doctors, and nurses for all of Europe.